I'm Karen Holst, an entrepreneur turned intrapreneur and author of Start Within, the playbook for doers taking on innovation within big companies. And I am super pumped to introduce Misha de Sterke and to talk about the lessons learned from the trenches of corporate venture building. Misha has a coming soon book on 10 times growth machine, how companies can innovate, scale, and win. A book that I literally, it's going to be the next book I buy as soon as it's out. Misha is a senior partner at Innoleaps, where they focus on building ventures for big corporations and helping protect, grow, or transform their business. So thank you, Misha, for sharing your knowledge. Let's dig in.
You're very welcome, and we will start. So, thanks for the introduction. I will immediately jump into the topic that we will talk about. So briefly, I've worked literally, I would say, in the trenches of venture building, which basically means how can we help established companies build new ventures and accelerate growth, because that's what it's about. It's not about producing MVPs. It's about can we get to a real business impact, and that's the challenge within an established company, but also for an external young company. So then the question becomes is why is it that only 1 out of 9 companies achieve sustainable and profitable growth? And that is basically because of a couple of things. And the things that I have noticed the most is that it's very difficult for big companies to ignore small opportunities. Because if you want to start a project, immediately people will ask, look, how big can this be? And that's an important criteria to actually allocate then resources and people to an opportunity. So you see that the accounting metrics of the big company basically only helps with building ventures or projects in opportunities in known markets. So that's also that you lose the smaller opportunities. Then at the second part is that growth creates complexity and complexity kills growth. So you see here a small model, which on the left side you have scale and below you have speed. And ideally a company combines the two. So a young company, a startup has speed to go to market, to understand the market, to launch prototypes, to talk with customers. And of course, an established company has already the skill, the assets, the brands, the distribution in place. But what happens is that when a young company grows, a couple of things happen. So the growth dilemma, we talked about it. So all the resources go, let's say, to opportunities in let's say, big markets. Organizational complexity kicks in, management layers will arise. The meetings and the PowerPoint presentations will take over. That also means at the same time we lose a little bit the sense of entrepreneurship. And there's, let's say, because an established company is big, it has multiple layers. So who is really in charge? That's the complexity that brings the scale of the company. Now, at the same time, we know that companies and change is coming. The future is more turbulent. Growth comes outside the core business and new competitors jump into the markets. Based on that, we have 3 types of organizations: the small companies, the startup scale-ups, the leaders of the industry, the incumbents, and companies that unfortunately will become a struggling bureaucracy because their size is a liability and they don't have the speed to react to changing market circumstances. So you see that many researches have been done, is that 7% of the companies are able to capture the benefits of speed and scale. Now, then a couple of examples, well-known companies that I call a growth machine, and basically they can combine the speed and scale that is necessary to grow fast. And for that, I have written the second book, which I call the 10x Growth Machine, which is basically an operating system that helps established companies, again, compete on speed and scale and become a growth machine. Now, so we need to bring back the art of venture building and combine this with the skill of an incumbent. But first, when I dive into, let's say, the lessons I have learned building these corporate ventures, what is actually the problem that we need to solve with corporate venture building? 3 topics to cover. And it's important that if we can align on these topics, it basically creates an environment within the corporate setting for innovation products to be judged and measured progress in a similar way as venture capital. Now, so what does it mean, these three topics? One of the things that are very important is that we need to create predictable timelines for go-to-market of new ideas with different milestones and phases. So I will show some examples later on, which makes this more clear. Secondly, as mentioned before, a corporate needs big revenue numbers to allocate resources for a project. Therefore, it's very important that the team that is building the venture is able to forecast the scalability of the idea for the immediate, but also near future. Forecasting in that sense should then also involve how fast can this company grow week over week? How many amount of consumers can we get in? But we also need to take into account that the venture is operating in a corporate environment. So we also need to think smart about how can we leverage these channels to grow fast. And that's, I think, a very important criteria, what I've learned. If we can show that we can grow fast through the channels that we have, you will have a different conversation with, let's say, the more senior management people. 8 lessons that we have learned. I have learned more, but it's always difficult to get it to the most important ones. So I will share these with you, and happy to, of course, address the questions later on. First of all, it's sort of an open door, a no-brainer. Bring the leadership on board, but to be honest, that is not always the case in most of what I have been through. And what does it mean to bring these leadership, the senior management on board? I see basically 2 things: mindset. What does it require for a manager to become more as an investor, and what does it mean as a role? So what is my role as a senior manager in these corporate venture building programs? These 2 things are very crucial. A couple of things when it comes to mindset. The team on the ground is completely focused on the customer. So what are the pain points of the customer? What is the customer trying to achieve? The well-known job to be done. So we try to gather data from the customer, and around that, and around these customer problems or customer jobs to be done, we try to build the next business. So this is very important for the senior management to understand. Fast decision making. That's also a crucial part, because the venture team literally makes hundreds of decisions per month, and every day there's a new challenge. So we don't have time to, let's say, complicate the problem or wait for, let's say, a full report with 100% of the information. For entrepreneurial people and venture builders, that makes a lot of sense, but don't forget that we do this within the established environment of a big corporate. And they view a lot of things, I see as, for example, a marketing exercise in which you get your full report with all the information. So that's sometimes uncomfortable sort of for the senior management to make these decisions based on less data. Now, what does it actually then mean? One of the crucial things is that the leadership should show is that we need to make problems smaller. So we can, to give an example, we can debate around branding. What type of brand do we need to take into account? Is that an existing big brand? But to be honest, in early stage venture building, it's not a relevant discussion. So we need to make it small. So how can we talk about the specific and not talk about ideological things, so the team can move forward and get stuff done? That's basically the challenge at hand. Supporting the teams by listening, coaching, and also celebrating the speed that the team and the progress that the team is making. Also, this makes a lot of sense, but if you are a manager working for 10 to 15 years, helping teams and telling teams what to do, it's a different mindset and it's a different approach. That also means that the team on the ground, in the front line, the venture building team, is in the lead of making the decisions. So let the team explore the market, understand and learn fast, and let's wait to judge this too fast. Now, this also means that it's more about peer-to-peer learning, collaboration across silos and business units instead of trying to control the scope of everything, and also defend, for example, your own turf. Now, then the quart, can senior managers act as investors? So what does this investor lens mean? First of all, very important, maybe for some people recognizable, is that it takes some time to grow a business to 100 million business, as the ones who have maybe done it already know. So we need to be patient for growth, but impatient for revenue. So the team, the venture building team, needs to show within a timeline of 3 to 4 months that they can actually sell a product. So the revenue. So patience for growth, impatience for revenue. Understanding metrics for growth and principles of portfolio investment. What this means is basically that per stage in the innovation process, which I will tap upon a little bit later, there are specific metrics that we use to understand the progress the team is making. So the team, for example, needs to have a clear understanding of how many of certain clients can we convert to a paying customer week over week. And we also need to understand how much can we sell to one customer per month. Let's say a first idea of the lifetime value of a client. Next to that, the principles of portfolio investing basically means that if you look at this model, and this is then in the fast-moving consumer goods, every industry has a different benchmark. But maybe for a couple of people, the traditional allocation of resources from Google is 70-20-10. So 70% of the portfolio is still invested in, let's say, the sustaining innovations, making the existing business better, faster, cheaper. Then the second part is, can we innovate? Can we go into adjacent territories, services, markets? 30%, and disruptive innovations is now 20%. So you see that the amount of investment in disruptive innovations is doubled in certain industries. So that basically also means that the industry will change and new players will come into this market with actually taking the lead on that part. The last part you see on the below is a growth gap. So what I always use is to use this concept to understand that if we have a portfolio, first we need to understand if it's balanced from a senior management perspective. Secondly, is the portfolio actually big enough to, fulfill the growth gap? So I've worked with a couple of dear people, and they had at one point a growth gap or a target of 300, 400, 500 million that needed to come out of innovation as a growth gap. But then actually, if you looked at the portfolio of programs and projects, that was way too small to actually get to that number. So this perspective, sort of a reality check for the senior management to get a well-balanced and well-funded portfolio in place. The second one is an end-to-end process with the predictable timelines like mentioned before. This is important because we need to understand how we go from idea to scale. And we need to define what scale means, because it's a very abstract term. And in each company, there are different interpretations of what scale means. So let's say this is more a traditional approach, is that we create a product, we create a marketing position, we create a sales plan, and we bring it to market. And then if things do not happen like we have foreseen or hoped for, is that, look, it was the sales department that didn't do a good job. And the sales department tells the marketing department, look, the position didn't work. And the marketing people to look, how can I sell or market a product that doesn't work? So that's what we want to change around. And we want to combine, let's say, lean startup methodologies, the whole idea of lean combined with the advantages of a direct and consumer relationship. You see here the build, measure, learn loop that is well used in the lean startup methodology. And basically that's also what we apply week over week, many iterations, but direct to consumer to understand that we need to bring it to a maturity level before we scale. Now, if you have a look at this model, you can download, by the way, all the models on the website, so no need to make pictures. Here you see the predictable timelines. So in 12 months, I need to understand that it's a scalable business. And each step has certain milestones that the team needs to hit. So if you look at the customer discovery program, which is approximately 10 weeks, we need to understand the consumer, the pain points, the jobs to be done, and also understand if the size of the opportunity is big enough. How many people have this problem and how many people are willing actually to solve this problem. If that's then, let's say we have some green checks on these metrics and milestones, then we move, depending on if we go into a new market a new product in a current market or an existing product in a current market, because the timelines condense if we go on the upper one, existing product, current market, because we know the customer, we can go to customers and ask them why they left the product or service. But let's stick to the new product, current market, for example, is that after we have the milestones of who is the customer, is it big enough? Yes, there is a pain point and an opportunity for us to solve. Can we then actually grow the MVP? And that means, can we get it to X amount of first paying customers within 3 months? So the team should understand the price point, the positioning of the product, the route to market, the channel. And if that is then, let's say it happens in a well executed manner, then we understand, let's say, a first understanding of the viability of the business. So how much can we sell this product to a customer and how many customers are out there? And we also understand a little bit more about the cost structure and what does it actually mean to produce this product. Then we move into a launch program or a launch phase, is that we basically identify, for example, 3 markets in Europe or in the US to say, okay, we're going to put this product on shelf or we're going to launch it big time online, but in 3 designated markets. And from that, at one point, the team needs to show that the whole business model works on a small scale, and then is ready to invest big money to go into different types of markets and scale global. But let's say this end-to-end process is important because it makes it more predictable. It gives the senior management that acts as an investor also a sense of, okay, what does the team need to come up with for getting new funds, to getting new money in the venture. So this makes things more predictable. Forecast scalability, that's number 3, and we talked about it briefly. So the R metrics is basically the growth hacking metrics that we use to understand how many people can we acquire, how many people that we can acquire will become a paying customer. And at one point we understand the data that well that we can predict how fast we can grow if we add certain amount of money into the sales funnel. So what the team needs to understand, look, based on the data, we can believe we can recruit X amount of customers per month. We retain 70% and make X amount of euros per customer in 2 markets. Then the whole business case become more predictable. And that gives, especially in the corporate setting, more comfort and likelihood of scaling and investing better. Benchmark success. What I always do is I need to understand what is a good benchmark of sales metrics in the industry. And I use that to compare how the team is performing and how scalable a product can be in the channels that are now used to sell the product. It's important because it gives this objective stick. 5, how to differentiate from competitors and protect your venture from being copied. Let's say most of the meetings I attended, this is always a question that comes up at one point. My first answer is always try to learn faster than your competitor. So if we iterate week over week on the marketing message, on the channel, on the proposition, it is pretty difficult to completely copy because your competitor is always behind. But of course, a couple of things that we always take into account and ask the team, what are the most novel, counter-initiative, surprising things that we have learned about the consumer persona, the problem and its context, the solution futures, or the channel. because basically you dive then into a couple of classic strategies, probably well known for you, is exclusive distribution, exclusive supply, intellectual property, customer loyalty. Is there a story or narratives that make customers fall in love? The network effect, so can we use different types of customers to get to new customers? So there are a couple of things that we get in place to protect the business. And it's very good as a venture team that you already have this prepared before the question comes, because in the end, it's all about trust between the investor and the team. And this really helps to build that trust. What's the exit plan? What I mean with this part is that, look, also a corporate investor would like to know when innovation stops and at one point it becomes a business. So based on the benchmark of the industry and the data that the team is showing on how can we sell this product and to whom and how big is this opportunity, we need to formulate and calculate with the team a monthly recurring revenue model. That basically means that the team needs to show that they can make months over months revenue, and the revenue becomes predictable. That can be, for example, 100,000 euros per month. That really depends on the type of venture that you're building and what type of industry. But it's very comfortable for everybody, also in the venture team, but also as a corporate investor, to have an understanding of this is what we're going to work towards to, that monthly recurring revenue model. Of course, also think about an integration plan for the business. It cannot happen that at one point the venture team wakes up and then they didn't take the core business people into their journey. Because if you want to innovate on the midterm and you want to use the assets at scale of the mothership, the corporate company, we need to take these people into account and come up with an integration plan for the business. Is it an independent business unit? Will it become a spin out? So these are the scenarios that we need to prepare. As said, that also means that in that journey, we need to take also the change management part into our minds, that we need to involve the relevant business partners early. Take them seriously, take their perspective into account, but also explain at the same time their role. So that's, let's say, a balancing act between how many people do you take in with the chance of going slower, but also at the same time, if you don't take these people into account, the likelihood that your venture will not survive is also pretty big. So involve your relevant business partners. The team is everything. The last two. I mean, what I've noticed is that building a venture is a roller coaster. And I always say is that I've built ventures myself as an external entrepreneur. So I only needed to win in the market, which is already difficult enough. There are so many challenges. But let's say if you have a corporate venture, you need to win in the market, but you also have a corporate environment that you need to take into account. So basically you have two playing fields in which you need to win. So the team is everything. And that means that we need to create complementary teams. We need to understand the team dynamic. We cannot only have very energetic entrepreneurs in the team, because then at the end, there's no structure. We are all enthusiastic, but maybe we don't finish things. So looking at the team before you start, it's a crucial part of, let's say, maybe half of the success of your venture. Also know when to switch members with different skills. Going from 0 to 1 is a different game, or let's say it requires a different skill set than going from 100 till 1 million. Bootstrap the team. That basically means after 5 till 6 months, ideally, they need to show, of course, after this month's rate that they can make money. Then also challenge them to try to finance themselves at one point. It's difficult, but bootstrapping the team and not, let's say, giving them too much time or too much money, it is also a source of creativity. So that's what I mean with this part. Then the last part, and then my talk is already over. Manage the irrationalities by pre-mediation. Well, this sounds almost obscure. But what I mean with this is because the venture building process, it's a roller coaster. The team selection is very important, and taking into account that we go to a mediator when it's a little bit too late. What we always try to do is look, have regular check-ins with the teams and then really talk about the things that frustrate people. But things that maybe not are always said because you don't want to step on toes constantly, but you need to get rid of, let's say, certain frustrations and have this open conversation to really go from idea to skill within such condensed time frames. So pre-mediation, it sounds, of course, very interesting, but it's basically, can we have good conversations before the shit happens? And that was my talk. I hope that makes a lot of sense and ready for the questions.
Thanks, Misha. That was great. There's such great content there. And I know that there was a question early on if this information would be available, and you'd mentioned it would be on the website. Do you want to share where you'll be posting that so people know where to get it?
Yeah, so I will place this deck and let's say all the models that you have seen. You can download them on the 10xgrowthmachine.com. So yeah, you can find
great.
them.
So there's some great questions that came in, and I know I have some as well. Let me just dive into Mark. His question was, what are some good sources to dive deeper into the near 6 months on your exit scenarios? If there's any resources for that.
Yeah, so I've wrote about it extensively in the book. Not yet in articles, so I'm working on a couple of articles to dive into specific chapters per piece. So follow the website. I will put some articles. There are already a couple of them already online, but if you really dive into this detail, the book is a good one. And also, what was the name again? Ulrich. Tony Ulrich is one of the guys that was a source of inspiration for me when I needed to come up with all these plans. And there was another person, the 4 models of corporate entrepreneurship. If you Google it, you will find it.
That is a great resource. I know about the second. Thank you.
That's good.
And so the second question that came from Javier, and it kind of ties into one of my questions, is when you talk about the team, how should you be mixing between internal and external headcounts? And thinking specifically about the skills, and then I'll dive into where my question goes with that as well.
Yeah, that's a good one. So it depends. So it depends. We most of the time work on innovations that we can scale through the brands and channels that our client has. So otherwise, then you really start building a venture from scratch. And I think the unfair advantage a big company has are their existing channels and all the resources they have. So looking at that from that perspective, I always try to have a small team, of course, a small team, core team of, let's say, 2-3 people of the client, and then basically understanding the product technology, so that sometimes somebody from R&D, somebody from the market, in which markets do we need to launch this venture, so I need somebody from that market. And sometimes in the beginning, consumer insights, and that has 2 reasons. First of all, because there's a lot of existing knowledge in the company. You cannot just close your eyes and start, reinvent the wheel. They would not appreciate that. And second of all, they can give you valuable insights in, we already tried this, but maybe it did not really work. So it can feed your experiment back, your experiment portfolio.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I love that, touching on the different roles that people should be holding within the team, but still keeping it close-knit. How do you, to the point that diversity in thinking is where novel and innovation comes from, how do you look at diversity on teams and help a corporate venture and trying to keep an eye on that? I mean, diverse voices.
Yeah, so diversity is important, but it also needs, then it should be managed in a more disciplined way, because diversity, it already says it will enrich the process in itself, but then you need to have very good, let's say, team agreements on how do we work together. And let's say that there's a very clear working discipline on, when do we need to have stuff done, and which to-dos are, needed to finish before the week. So I think it's very important, but it requires more discipline from the team.
I love that, having it kind of go back to the team that owns it and kind of managing it themselves rather than it be a mandate on how to get through it. Oh, good. Another question came in. It's what about basics, the accounting, app development, legal, etc. Do these come from the corporate, or is it better to outsource?
Yeah, that's a good question. I could actually make it lesson number 9. So I will update it with lesson number 9. Now, so on the team, so we have, let's say, most time 2 to 3 people from the business, the core business. Then we have 3 people on our side that works on execution, an entrepreneur, a growth hacker, designer, everything to execute fast. Then we also take into account legal and, let's say, and finance most of the time. For a couple of reasons. If we understand after 3 months that we can sell this product for X amount of price, I always let the accountant, the finance person, do a check on the business case to make sure, sort of like a credibility stamp, that it's approved and it makes sense what we talk about. So that's one. And we also help finance understand innovation accounting metrics better, because let's say a CFO or financial people, they are of course very interested in how to fund these types of initiatives. So we take them on board in that end-to-end process and give them indications about what is the financial investment that you need to make per phase. Legal we take into the journey. That's important because if we want to, let's say, build a business under a known brand, it's not, let's say, the first thing legal would embrace completely, because they need to protect the business. So that leadership alignment on top is very important to make sure, look, this company needs to invent the future and we need to build new ventures. Legal needs to take into account, okay, is that we need to actually help the venture team to build a venture within, let's say, certain sanity checks, but we cannot block it. And that's a crucial element. So we take them into the journey, not completely, of course, but for the most important things.
That's great. And in looking at the question, I also see a component that if you're thinking about it being internal or external, I would imagine there's, a best practices, and then there's this is the first time you're taking a go at this, and there might be a different path that you have to take, and you're getting creative along the way.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads to my next question, which is, you're new at this, you're building a new program, your management has never maybe led something like this, and executives, this is all new. Where are some one key point that keep your eye on this, because this is where it can get out of control on a new front?
Now, so basically, if I understand the question correctly, is how to start also, when this is new, and what makes sense and what is smart. Is that correct?
Yes. Common pitfalls when you're starting out.
Well, starting too big, that's definitely a pitfall, because let's say the way of working, even for the venture team, lean startup methodologies, growth hacking, all these fantastic methodologies and terms, it requires, let's say, really a 360 degrees mindset shift. And that's already for the venture team in itself a whole challenge. But at the same time, if we start too big, then all these people that do not understand what we are trying to achieve, and they look at our methodologies and ways of working, what is an MVP, they really don't get it, and it actually creates more blockers than it facilitates fast learning. So how it most of the time starts is that somebody in the company, a senior manager, really thinks, look, we need to change how we work. We need to become more consumer-centric and all these buzzwords that we know, more agile, etc. So that's sometimes where it starts. And what we try to do then is get, let's say, first of all, the leadership on board. So how are we going to make money in the future? If we look at a venture building portfolio, what type of bets do we need to make? Then let's start small. Let's take 2 teams or 3 ideas, pick a couple of people that we think in the corporate are maybe ready to leave the company because they cannot fit within the existing structure. These are the people that also probably are very intrapreneurial. And I would like to have 5 or 6 people to start with 3 teams, get the senior management on board, 3 ideas, and then under the radar work till you have, let's say, a very tangible product that you can sell. And then it's time to, step by step involve more people of the business.
That's great. And yeah, the idea of a champion, I think, is super important. And then also hearing just how you go about doing that and getting people excited. That's great advice. Another couple of questions that came in. Marco shares very passionate story. Thank you. And then what do you have coming up this year? What business objective do you want?
For myself?
Yes.
My own business objective.
What are you doing?
Yeah, so I think my own business objective is what I have with my own company at the moment, is that we really want to build the growth machine. Of course, that's the title of my book. But I want to help companies really build a growth machine at scale. So how can we move from a more ad hoc approach of, hey, we do an accelerator here and a bootcamp there, and we play with a startup in that domain, but how can we really go to a more systematic approach end to end and really lead to big revenue numbers? So we have a couple of very interesting success cases of scale-ups that really are becoming a very mature business. And for me, that's my own challenge is always, can I help an established company change on these different layers at the same time? Because you need to speak and educate with the senior management, which are very capable people, but you need to bring them into a new domain, then manage different ventures at the same time through different maturity phases, take legal into account. I mean, it's already a journey in itself. So I will never be bored with it. It's always different for every client.
That actually goes into the next question. And how do you best deal with compliance, legal, and when does that happen?
Ideally, yeah. So that's sort of, we figured it out the hard way with a lot of things, right? So with legal, it's important in the early stages to have, let's say, a simple understanding. First of all, that they understand what is actually rapid prototyping, that we sell products that do not exist. I mean, this is for legal people. You're misleading consumers, and how can you do this, etc. And there are always a couple of people that think that legal should change their own way of working. Now, these are the people that I always find. They will probably organize a session where I can speak then to the legal community, which I have done a couple of times to bring them on board in the methodology. And then I always ask them, look, what is now, let's say, can we create bottom up a new set of small 5, 6, 10 legal policies that enable fast learning? So when can we test on brand? If we build a product which people maybe need to sign NDAs, how can we then test it in the market? How big is the reach? So that you set some boundaries behind certain steps that you take around MVPs, testing on brand, these type of topics. Getting money from consumers is also always a burning topic. So that's then what you talk about with them, early stage, so in the beginning.
That's great. A question sort of around that or adjacent to it is, what is, or do you have any experience with creating an external sandbox to circumvent legal compliance before a new product is getting initial validation?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, yes. But it never starts there. So in my opinion and in my experience, it never started, let's create a separate entity with an own sandbox. Fantastic. I would be very happy if that would happen from the beginning. But most of the time it's like a journey. So you start with a couple of teams, you show a success, then other people get enthusiastic, then you have another leadership session, then you take legal into the journey. And then at one point you feel that the momentum is, because now for a client we run 10 ventures at the same time. And after the first 3, there was already a topic, look, we really need to create different legal rules. And now actually they come up themselves to separate the complete venture unit into a different legal entity. So 2 clients have a separate legal entity, but it didn't start it like that. Would be great, but till now it didn't happen.
Great, thanks for the story. This one comes from Arash. How would you convince HR core management about the importance of incentivizing entrepreneurs appropriately? I love this question.
Yeah. So it's already difficult when you need to convince people. That's always the problem with convincing. So what I always try to do is basically So I know with a couple of clients, we have the experience that at one point you really need to have a different incentive system, because these people that build ventures, they think at one point, look, it's fantastic that I go to a 7 till 9 months roller coaster, working my ass off literally, and making money for the mothership in that sense. And at one point they will start asking these questions. Look, can I get equity? So what I see a couple of models is that they cut a piece of the salary and give equity back, or revenue share models is also something in place. But that point of topic, it will become very obvious, let's say, after your first 3 to 6 ventures, and that you have teams that move to a scale part. Because then the topics of how can we get these people and retain these people at our company, because they have sort of a unique skill set, becomes more relevant. Because that's the problem, is that capable people of doing this, it's a sort of a rare breed. So if you find them, keep them. And then the question becomes, how do we keep them? A different incentivize model. So it will, in my experience, it will pops up when relevant. And of course, you can start educate and show examples of other clients and companies who do it. But that's not always the sense of urgency that they're needed to change it.
If you look at the mix of companies that you work with, is there attention, like do they tend to go in one direction or another? Like what's the common theme when it comes to that kind of work?
You mean different type of incentive models?
Yes.
Now it tends to go like say a small cut in the salary and then an equity model in the venture. So they have a small part equity in the venture.
Nice, thank you. So I know we're nearing the end, and for the last 3 minutes, there's a question that comes in. I don't see any that came in. I know one for me is heavy on my mind in this moment that we're in with the uncertain future of how things are going to play out. What are some predictions that you think are going to be happening with these types of programs over the next 2 years?
Now, what I see that's happening is that depends on the industry, but if I take the fast-moving consumer goods as an example, which we work myself most in this industry, is that the type of ventures are less bold in that sense. So it's a little bit more to their core business. And that means in the sense of FMCG product innovations. What I also see happening is that let's say also at the same time the D2C, the e-commerce models are becoming super relevant. So that's also sort of a tendency of investing there. But at the same time, unfortunately, with the smaller companies which don't have the budgets, there you see these types of initiatives actually being stopped, which I think is not a smart thing, because especially, let's say, building ventures, lean startup, all these types of methodologies is basically created to deal with uncertainty. So if you learn fast and you understand how the market reacts to MVPs that you launch, I mean, it brings such a competitive advantage that you have. So yeah, that's what I see happening, good things and less good things.
Thank you for that. I know we just have a few seconds before we're going to get kicked out of this room. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. Do you want to give any more information about how to reach out to you?
No, I would say, look, you can always find me on LinkedIn. My name is Misha de Sterke. And you can check out the website. There you will find a lot of tools and checklists that you can use. I made it very pragmatic. So I hope that this session gives you some of concrete things to start with. And together with these tools, I hope you can start next week building a venture.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.